Hello again, everyone. Andy Garcia here, looking at the markets, and I'm currently looking at the intra-week activity of the dollar index futures and the major currencies that we follow. As you can see here on the far left, we got the dollar index futures, followed by the yen, the Swiss franc, and the Canadian all across the top. And as you can see across the bottom here, we have the euro, the pound, the Australian dollar. And what we're looking at primarily are charts that are on a 4-hour basis. And what you're going to notice here is that I'm looking at last week's high, last week's low, last week's close. And that's really what's inside of these boxes here. You can see inside in the dollar index, for instance, we're illustrating last week's high, low, and close, last week's trading range for that matter. And to get into the nuts and bolts here, you can see that the dollar index futures basically tried to break out of last week's high early on in the week, found some sellers, went sideways, and then towards the back end of the week this week, it basically finished above last week's highs, showing a little bit of dollar strength and risk aversion across the markets. As you can see, dollar index futures pushing up above 81 even and as high as 81.50 before failing and closing at 81.26. Now the curious thing about it here is that, as you can see, the euro did try to break out of last week's low but was not able to maintain the same kind of correlation that we typically look for, although the euro did come back down towards the previous week's low. The important thing here is that the dollar index futures broke out of last week's high, and typically what I expect is the euro to follow and break down below last week's low, which did not happen, which was kind of interesting. So I'll be watching to see what happens going into next week to see if this dollar has found a little bit of buyers down here at 126.89. As you can see, a little bit of a retracement, but overall not able to get outside of last week's trading range in the euro dollar. The pound, on the other hand, was able to trade down below last week's low. Now the question here is whether or not we're going to continue to stay below 160. As you can see, closing right about 158.89, and the market pushing down below last week's low. You can see a couple of opportunities here to get short in the pound, even though there were nothing that you could hold on to, but you could see there were definitely some decent trading opportunities as opposed to what you're looking at in the euro just not acting right. But Australian dollar here able to make its way down below last week's low, rallied up, got some resistance at 103.37 and pushed down into Thursday night, Friday morning, before rallying back up to last week's low right about 103.42. What's interesting here is that there was not a lot of conviction to the downside in the euro, pound, the Australian dollar on the back of the dollar index breaking out to the upside. You can see dollar index above last week's high. That would lead you to believe that the euro should push down below last week's low, the pound here to push down below last week's low, and the Australian dollar here to push down below last week's low as well. But the problem is that none of them stayed down below their previous week's lows, and that tells me that essentially that the sellers were not willing to come in and push the market lower. So we'll have to be on alert and double check our higher time frames to see if there's anything going on here. The Japanese yen, awesome trade here. 80.55 was last week's high, breaking out above last week's high. As you can see, finished pretty strong. 81.26, right about 81.26 was the closing price, but mainly we were able to break above last week's high, showing some strength here in the Japanese yen, and it looks like that was probably your best opportunity in terms of a breakout and go. On the other side of the coin, you can see the Swiss franc tried to break out of last week's high, similar to the dollar index futures, and failed, and was not able to work its way back up towards 95 even for the rest of the week, which is, when you see this kind of stuff, you can see here that the Swiss franc not able to push above last week's high, and that confirms the reason why the dollar index was not able to basically break out and go at the same time that the euro, the pound, the Australian dollar were not able to go lower as well. And you got the Canadian dollar here, tried to break above last week's high right about 100.60 here was the high in the week, and then pushing back down to parity. Most importantly, the Canadian dollar was nothing but a sideways choppy mess. So in a sense, we're talking about going into a holiday week next week for the U.S. economy, or the U.S. the Americans when Thanksgiving and such, and that kind of leads into the reason why these markets have a tendency to go sideways. So as you can see, one thing to pay attention to, the dollar index tried to break out of last week's high, but it did not get any confirmation or help from the other currencies, namely the euro, the pound, the Australian dollar, not willing to help push the dollar index further along. At the same time, the Swiss franc here was not able to break out and go above last week's high. At the same time, the Canadian dollar was not able to go above last week's high either. You can see Canadian dollar just going sideways. The only market really that was willing and able to move outside of last week's trading range here was the Japanese yen. And so outside of that, given the fact that that was the case, it turned out to be one of those weeks that you had to be a scalper or quick ins and quick outs. So in a sense, next week it might be a little bit quiet as well, and we'll have to pay attention as that evolves. If you want a little bit more in-depth analysis about these currencies and what you could probably look for going into next week, you want to check out our premium market wrap video. And with that in mind, this is Andy Garcia signing off. I hope it helps. That's all I got for this market wrap, folks. We'll see you in the next update. While I got you here, I wanted to take a quick moment to say that if you really liked what you're looking at here in the free Forex market wrap video, I wanted to give you the opportunity to come take a look at the premium weekly Forex market wrap video that I do every week. And basically it's a little bit more in depth, or should I say a lot more in depth information about the markets that I cover. And you can see here that in this short video I go over the basics about what I've been looking at on the major currencies. And the more in-depth market wrap video, I take a look at a in-depth analysis on the 6 major currency pairs. You also get actionable trading scenarios. The important thing here is that we're offering a 3-day risk-free trial, so you don't have to pay a cent. It's about a 30 to 45 minute video that'll go through all the major currency pairs that I look at, and it shows you a lot more in-depth analysis and forecast, looking at the longer term picture and the big major trends that are affecting what you're looking at on the lower time frames that you're looking at on a day-to-day basis. So take a moment to go take a look at the premium market wrap video. You can see the link here provided, www.traderstouch.com/3day, and it also includes a free membership to the Traders Learning Network, where you can meet other traders that are like-minded individuals, and they're basically there to help everybody looking at the same markets as you. So good luck, hope it helps, and look forward to seeing you on the inside.